Good morning, grade 11 students. Welcome to today's lesson. Today we'll be talking about blood. Last week we talked about blood vessels, and today we're starting off with our topic of blood. So today we're going to be looking at the main function of the circulatory system, and then we're going to look at the specific function of each component that makes up blood. So let's get started. First, we're going to look at what our objectives are today. Outline the function of the circulatory system, illustrate the composition of blood, detail the function of each component of blood, and describe the process of coagulation. Now, you can make some notes as we go through the slides, but there is going to be a note sheet that is going to be attached at the end of today's lesson. But you can also go ahead and make your own notes if it's easier for you. What exactly is blood? Okay, now blood is not just one thing. We know we need blood because blood is how we're able to transport substances around the body. And several different types of substances are transported around the body through blood. But what exactly is blood? Blood is classified as both a tissue and a fluid. Now, it's a tissue, and it's usually described as being connective tissue because it is made up of several cells. And we know by definition, cells carrying out a specific function working together is what a tissue is. So blood is a tissue. It is a fluid. It is a fluid. It is a liquid fluid. And because it's a fluid, blood is able to flow. Blood is also a mixture. So blood is a tissue. Blood is a fluid, and it's also a mixture. And by definition, because blood is a mixture, we're able to separate the parts of blood. Okay, they can be physically separated. So we know that blood is a tissue. It's connective tissue. It is a fluid, and in this case, the fluid that it is liquid, so it's able to flow. And blood is a mixture. It is a mixture, so it can easily be separated into its components. So let's get into it. The function of the circulatory system is to transport blood around the body. Now, as we just mentioned, blood is several things. So the circulatory system is responsible for circulating blood because in blood, several things that the body needs and the cells of the body need. So blood transport useful substances such as oxygen and nutrients. Oxygen is required by all of your cells, as well as nutrients, specifically sugars, in order to carry out respiration. And when your cells undergo respiration, your cells are essentially producing energy so that the cells of the body can carry out its function. So, when we talk about blood, the average adult person has 4 to 6 quarts of blood, or 2.5 liters of blood, circulating their body at any given time. Now, for primary school, you would have learned that 4 quarts is equal to 1 gallon. So we're saying that your body has essentially 6 quarts, or 1.5 gallons of blood, or if we're looking at the metric system, 2.5 liters of blood at any given time, circulating in your blood vessels in this closed system. And how is it that the blood is able to circulate the body? Well, the heart. The heart is the pump that is responsible for pushing this blood to all parts of the body. And the heart essentially will circulate this blood so many times throughout the day, it can be said that over 2,000 gallons of blood is pumped through the body a day. Now, keeping in mind, this is the same 2.5 liters, but that's how many times it is pumped around the body in a given day. So, as we mentioned before, blood circulates useful substances around the body in the form of oxygen and nutrients, but you can also find waste products being transported through the blood as well. So we have carbon dioxide that has no usefulness to the body, that has to be released from the body in the form of waste, and we exhale it every time we breathe out. And then we have other waste chemicals that are produced by the liver and transported to the kidneys to be released from the body. Now, the way things will move around the body is essentially through blood. So that is why we normally classify blood, the circulatory system, as the transportation system. This is how most substances move around the body, through your blood. So our circulatory system transports oxygen, transports carbon dioxide, transports nutrients, transports waste. But there are other substances that are also transported through the blood. Now, we would have learned that hormones are released into the bloodstream and transported to specific parts of the body to bring about some type of reaction. So hormones are also found in blood. We have antibodies that are found in blood, and we also have blood proteins that are found in blood. Now, even though these substances are found in blood, these substances do not make up blood. It's the difference, okay? So at any point in time, you may find hormones circulating in your bloodstream, as well as antibodies, blood proteins, nutrients, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and other waste products. However, these are not components of blood. These are substances that you would find circulating in blood. What exactly is blood? What makes up blood? We now know that blood is a tissue, blood is a fluid, and blood is a mixture. We know that we can find useful substances in blood, as well as substances that the body needs to get rid of in blood. And we also now know that the blood is used to transport other useful substances around the body. So, blood has so many uses. What exactly is blood? What are the things or the components that make up this mixture that we call blood? So, when we talk about blood, blood is comprised of 4 basic components. The liquid part of blood, this is the part of blood that we call the plasma. This is the liquid part of blood. This is what actually causes blood to flow. And plasma is primarily water. Then we have our cell components. We have 2 types of cells that are found circulating in blood. We have our red blood cells, and we have our white blood cells. And then we have these cell-like fragments called platelets. All 4 components together make up what we call blood, okay? So when we talk about blood, we have to keep in mind, we're not talking about this one thing. We're talking about these 4 things coming together, forming a mixture, and together, these things allow blood to carry out its function. All right, so let's continue. So if we were to look at blood, like I mentioned, blood is a mixture. And because it's a mixture, that means we can physically separate the components that make up blood. So if we look at our diagram here, we have, normally when you think of blood, this vial or this test tube is what you think of. You think of this red liquid, okay? So, but when we really separate blood into its components, we see that the liquid part of blood really is not red. The liquid part of blood, which is known as plasma, is a straw-like yellowish liquid, okay? It's not red. So why is blood red? Blood is red because we have 45% of blood being made up of red blood cells. So all of these red blood cells contained in this plasma makes blood appear as a red liquid. But the liquid part of blood actually is a pale yellow. So if we were to separate blood into its components, and we can do that in a laboratory using an instrument called a centrifuge, and a centrifuge simply spins very, very quickly, so it allows solid or heavier substances to sink and lighter substances to float. So when we separate blood using the centrifuge, we now can see that blood is made up of parts, and 55% of your blood is basically plasma, the yellow liquid part of blood. The other 45% is basically made up of your red blood cells, your white blood cells, and your platelets. But if we were to look at blood, The largest component of blood is actually plasma, followed very closely by red blood cells, white blood cells, and then platelets. So our top diagram shows us our percentages after it has been separated, and our bottom diagram right here shows us what it would actually look like in a lab, where we have our red blood cells and our white blood cells. We have this very thin layer here that would represent our white blood cells and our platelets, and then we have our plasma. So because it is a mixture, it can be separated into its components that make it up. So again, blood is made up of 4 parts. We have our white blood cells, we have our red blood cells, we have our platelets, and we have our plasma. Again, plasma making up the largest component of blood. It is the liquid part of blood, and plasma itself is primarily water. So, you know, when we talk about our body being more than 70% water, you have to take into account all of these fluids and liquids that are themselves made up basically of water. And that accounts for our water quantity in our bodies. So, the first diagram we looked at, remember at the beginning I talked about different representations of how we look at blood or illustrations. The first one was a diagram that showed blood being represented in a test tube. So our blood is separated in parts. Again, a diagram you need to be familiar with. If you had to label this diagram in a quiz or a test, then you should know that 55% or the liquid part will always float to the top. The heavier solids, being the red blood cells, the white blood cells, and the platelets, will sink to the bottom of the test tube. So in this example, you would know that the liquid part would be 55% plasma, and the solid parts will make up the other 45%, which will essentially bring us out to 100% blood. So now we're going to look at a second diagram that represents blood. And usually when you see this diagram, this represents blood as if it was being viewed under a microscope. So we have, here we're saying this is a drop of blood. If we were to magnify this drop of blood, this is what we would expect to see under a microscope. So we would see our red blood cells with its very distinguishable red blood cell shape. We have our white blood cells, usually very large with a lobed nucleus. And then we have these little fragments of something. So they are fragments of cells, and they are platelets. And then, of course, plasma will be that part of blood that's not really highlighted because it's the liquid part of blood. So we now can assume that these blood cells and blood fragments are being held up in this medium called plasma, or this liquid called plasma. So if we were to look at our blood drop under a microscope, we should expect to see red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, and of course the liquid component, which is the plasma. Now, in this diagram, or this illustration of blood, we can clearly see that we have a ratio of more red blood cells to white blood cells. Everybody agrees with that? So we have a whole lot of red blood cells, and if we look at just this diagram, we only have 2 white blood cells. So this would account for why our blood looks red. Why our blood looks red is simply because we have so many red blood cells in plasma, it appears as if it is red. Okay? So keep that in mind. So let's get into our blood components. So, plasma. It is a yellow colored fluid. It is the liquid part of blood, and it's 90% water. You have other dissolved substances found in the plasma, like what we talked about earlier in forms of blood proteins and hormones. They would be dissolved in the plasma and transported around the body in that way. So plasma is the liquid part of blood. It contains some proteins that are also important for blood clotting. So a lot of useful substances are found in plasma. Plasma, like I said, is the liquid part. So because plasma is liquid, it allows blood to flow easily. So plasma contains our nutrients, our gases. Well, we know some gases are in plasma, but we know oxygen and carbon dioxide usually attach themselves to red blood cells. We have our hormones in there. We have some enzymes in there, as well as waste products. So plasma, very important to the whole flow of this whole fluid that we call blood. And then we get into now our blood cells. Now the blood cells are made in the bone marrow of your long bone. So we're now getting into talking about the blood cells that help to make up blood. So before we can talk about it, we need to know where do they come from. Well, they're made in our long bone cells, bone. The femur is one of our long bones where white blood cells, red blood cells, and platelets are made. So our blood cells. Now, when we talk about our blood cells, we primarily talk about our red blood cells, which we also refer to as our erythrocytes. We talk about our white blood cells that are also referred to as our leukocytes. And then we have our platelets, which aren't really true cells. We call them fragments of cells or fragmented cells. And they are also known as thrombocytes. So red blood cells are also known as erythrocytes. You know, science, we like to make things so complicated. White blood cells are also known as leukocytes, and our platelets are referred to as thrombocytes, okay? So you can use these terms interchangeably. So this is what our cells would look like under a very high electron microscope. And I'm sure all of you should be able to identify these cells, even if it was just by a process of elimination. So we have this big cell right here that has this nice concave in the middle. We have this large cell that has a lot of these little like projections. And we have this other structure right here that doesn't look so much like a complete cell. So I'm going to hover my mouse over this cell. Who can tell me what this cell is? Give me a good guess. Okay, I see somebody chimed in already. I want to see a couple more answers. Very good. Okay, red blood cells. It is very characteristic of red blood cells to have this concave, or the biconcave dentation is at the center. So this is our red blood cell. What about this? I'm hovering the mouse over this one now. What do you think this one may be? Okay, very good. We're all in agreement. This is our platelet, okay? So our fragmented cell or our thrombocyte. And I want you to get comfortable in using the alternate names as well. So we have, this is our, anybody remember what our red blood cell is also called? What is this? Our red blood cell, we also call it what? I'm waiting for an answer. Very good. Erythrocytes. Very good. Our platelets, we also call them thrombocytes. Very good. And finally, this is our third cell. And as you would have guessed, or you eliminated the others, this would be our white blood cell, which is also called, I'm waiting, very good. Well, leukocytes, okay? Let's go with leukocytes first, because we're going to see that we have different types of leukocytes. So let's hold off on that lymphocyte answer for the moment. All right, so we're ready to go on. So the first blood cell that we're going to look at is our red cell. And the function of our red blood cell is very simple. Our red blood cell is designed to transport oxygen around the body. The more red blood cells, the more places for oxygen to attach, okay? So we have red blood cells that are responsible for transport oxygen around the body. Now, oxygen doesn't just attach to red blood cells and just circulate the body. Oxygen has to be transported to all cells of the body. Because remember, the cells of your body need oxygen in order to undergo cellular respiration. And cellular respiration is the process by which the cells will produce energy. And energy is required to carry out function. Oxygen attaches to the cells as a means to be delivered to all cells of the body. Okay? So how does oxygen attach? It attaches to hemoglobin. Now, hemoglobin is iron. It's iron, basically. And what happens is oxygen attaches to the iron, making it oxyhemoglobin. And by attaching to the iron, it is able to be transported around the body. So when we talk about our red blood cells, our main function of our red blood cells is to transport oxygen around the body. And how? Oxygen attaches itself to the hemoglobin, which is an iron component of the red blood cell, and by attaching to the iron, it is able to be transported easily by these red blood cells. Now we go on to our white blood cells. Now you would have learned that white blood cells, also known as leukocytes, are responsible for helping our body to fight off infections or diseases or any type of foreign invader that may try to attack our body, okay? So these white blood cells basically help our body to build immunity as well as to fight infection. The interesting thing about leukocytes is that they're able to pass through the capillary wall. Now, normally when we talk about the capillaries, we talk about the capillaries being very small blood vessels, and oxygen and nutrients are able to diffuse out of the capillaries so they can be taken up by the cells, and the cells can get rid of waste products and it can diffuse into the capillaries. But our white blood cells have also the ability to leave the capillary and enter tissue if, in fact, the tissue has some type of infection. Very interesting thing about white blood cells. Now, when we talk about our white blood cells, we have two basic categories of white blood cells, okay? We have our white blood cells that basically engulf and digest foreign invaders. And then we have those other white blood cells that help our body to build up immunity. So producing antibodies so that you can fight off any new infection, okay? So white blood cells, basic function is to help our body with immunity, help to fight off infections and diseases. And we have two categories of them. We have first our phagocytes. Now, the phagocytes are those white blood cells that actually confront the infection, the invader, the bacteria, the foreign body. So when we talk about our blood, 70% of the white blood cells that are in your blood are these type of white blood cells that we call phagocytes. Now, phagocytes are those on the front line. They're the first ones in the battle, okay? They don't produce antibodies, but instead they ingest and digest any type of pathogen. So a pathogen could be a bacteria, any type of foreign particles, or dying cells even. And they do this as a mechanism of protecting the body. So whenever an infection is present, chemical signals help to attract these phagocytes to the site of the infection. And they go straight at it, almost like wartime. They engulf, they digest, they destroy. Now, they may be destroyed in the process as well, but they are the ones on the front line. They are the ones that attack any infection immediately. So when we look at this whole process of ingesting, digesting, and destroying a pathogen, this whole process is what is known as phagocytosis, okay? So phagocytes undergo or carry out phagocytosis in that they ingest, digest, and destroy pathogens. And then we have other types of white blood cells. These are the lymphocytes. I saw somebody mentioned it a little bit earlier. So our lymphocytes are also very important to our immune system, but like I said, the phagocytes are those on the front line. The lymphocytes come in later, okay? So the lymphocytes are part of the immune defense, and they work almost the same way, but they don't do the ingesting and digesting. They're the smarter ones. They think it out, they plot it out, and they're the ones that help to prevent further infection or reinfection. So the lymphocytes are part of our immune defense. They act to recognize antigens, produce antibodies, which are very important, especially in the cases of reinfection. So if you were to be reinfected with a virus or germ, you already have this natural immunity because you were first introduced to that virus or germ or pathogen, okay? There are three types of lymphocytes. We have our T cells, our B cells, and our natural killer cells. Now the B cells, they recognize the antigen and become plasma cells that produce antibodies. So our B cells are those ones that produce antibodies to ward off any further infection or any reintroduction of an infection. The T cells, they also help in a variety of immune responses in fighting off viral infections, cancers, the likes. And then we have our natural killer cells. And they go to war to kill like tumor cells, cancerous cells, or viral infection, any type of cell that has been infected by a virus. The lymphocytes are generally found in your lymph nodes at different parts of your body where you have your lymph nodes, and they come into action after an infection has taken place in most cases. So like I said, our phagocytes are on the front line, and our lymphocytes are the more strategic white blood cells that help in your body's long-term immune response. So our lymphocytes produce in our lymph glands and nodes, and our phagocytes produced in our bone marrow, okay? They have two different functions. Like I mentioned earlier, the phagocytes front line, they fight off invaders right away. They go for the attack. And our lymphocytes, they're more like the long-term immunity. So they produce antibodies. They also help in fighting off cancerous tumors and viruses. Finally, we come to our platelets. So our platelets are now responsible for clotting. Now, why would your blood need to clot? When your blood clot is basically to prevent blood loss. So if you have some rupture or tear in your blood vessel, because remember our blood vessel is a closed system, and blood should always be in your blood vessel and not leaking out of your blood vessel. Our platelets play a role in preventing blood loss. So it helps to stop bleeding. So our platelets, they are the smallest formed part of blood. Like I said earlier, we refer to them as fragments of cells and not so much cells. When a blood vessel is damaged, the platelets are activated and they become sticky and come together to help form blood. Now, blood clotting is a process, and it actually it causes like a domino effect. When one thing is activated, it causes several other factors to be activated to help to actually close off or stop blood loss. How do our platelets work? And what role do they really play in the body? So to ensure that blood vessels, when rupture or when there's injury, a blood clot is very important. Because we cannot afford to lose blood. Most of the time, and what I my students in class, when we talk about blood loss, we're not dying because we lose blood. We're dying because these central substances that blood is responsible for transporting is interrupted. So if we say that blood transports oxygen and nutrients, and we need our blood in order to get oxygen and nutrients to our cells, and our cells are depending on that oxygen and nutrients to carry out respiration, because we need respiration to produce energy, and cell energy to carry out its life processes. If we're not getting sufficient blood, i.e., oxygen and nutrients to our cells, cells will die. Now, if our cells are part of a tissue, then that tissue will die. And if the tissue makes up an organ, then that organ will essentially die. So when we talk about blood and the loss of blood, we have to keep in mind that when we lose blood, we're not losing blood. We're losing access to oxygen, access to nutrients, access to getting rid of waste. So to ensure that blood is not lost or tremendous blood loss is prevented, blood clotting is very important, okay? So blood clotting can also prevent you from bleeding to death, okay? And there are people who exist who actually don't have the ability to clot their blood. So any type of injury where a blood vessel is ruptured can actually result in their death. So the process by which blood clot is formed is called coagulation cascade. And like I said, it's like a domino effect. When it's initiated, several things happen. So the clotting factors cause platelets, and these clotting factors are found circulating in your blood plasma. Cause platelets become sticky and adhere to the damaged region, which forms a solid plug. They also trigger now a domino effect, where we have the conversion of an inactive protein in the blood called prothrombin, and it becomes activated into an enzyme known as thrombin. Once thrombin has been activated, thrombin actually catalyzes the conversion of a soluble plasma protein known as fibrinogen into an insoluble fibrous form called fibrin. Now, what fibrin does, fibrin actually forms work that will eventually form what we would call on an external cut, the scab. So this meshwork actually forms the barrier that will help to prevent the excessive loss of blood. In order for all of these processes to take place successfully, calcium and vitamin K are essential nutrients that are required for the blood clotting process. So if you have a deficiency in vitamin K in your diet or calcium in your diet, you may find that you may have difficulty or it may take a longer time for your blood to clot properly. So let's recap. Plasma, the liquid part of blood. Most substances are transported in plasma, such as nutrients, hormones, blood proteins. We have our red blood cells, which is primarily responsible for transporting oxygen. Then we have our white blood cells. Even though we talked about the two different types of white blood cells, the primary function is still the same, in that it helps the body to fight off infections and diseases. And then finally, we have our platelets, whose primary function is the clotting of blood, okay? So how blood clots again? So we have our clotting factors. These clotting factors help to activate prothrombin into thrombin. Thrombin then catalyzes fibrinogen, which is soluble, into a soluble fibrin that now forms the meshwork that will become the barrier that prevents blood from escaping or leaking out of the blood vessel. So summary, blood transports oxygen, blood transports carbon dioxide, nutrients, metabolic and waste products, heat, as well as hormones. So these are the things that blood transports, but these things do not make up blood. These are not what blood is. Remember, blood is 4 components: plasma, red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets. But we can find all of these other substances in the fluid that we call blood. So again, 55% of your whole blood is plasma, and the remaining 45% with less than 1% being made up of white blood cells and platelets is your blood cell. Blood looks red simply because we have so much, the ratio of red blood cells to plasma or white blood cells is much greater. So the red blood cells give blood the appearance of being red. So here's our little activity. So this diagram we had earlier in the lesson, and it's showing you the 4 basic components of blood, and we're going to work it out together. So first we have a table. The table is incomplete, and we have to complete the table, and then we have 5 questions to answer. So we're going to do it as a group. So P, what cell type is P? So now we're going to look to see what cell type is P so that we can fill in this section of our table. So P is representative of our red blood cells or our erythrocytes. And what is the main function of P? Give me the main basic function of P. The main function of P is basically to transport or attach oxygen and transport oxygen to all the cells of the body. So P is the red blood cells, and its basic function is basically the transport of oxygen around the body. Very good. So Q has been labeled for us as the white blood cell. What is the other name we refer to, the white blood cell, the general name for white blood cells? Let's first get that answer. White blood cells are also known as, very good. So white blood cells are known as our leukocytes, okay? When we talk about leukocytes, phagocytes as well as lymphocytes are leukocytes. So we have leukocytes, and branching from our leukocytes, we have our phagocytes and our lymphocytes. So when we refer to white blood cells, they are also known as leukocytes. So what is the main basic function of our white blood cells? So normally when you answer this question, the main function of white blood cells basically is to protect the body against infection, or it's your body's immune response to infections or diseases. So white blood cells protect or fight off diseases or infections. Very good. To protect the body against infections and or diseases. Okay? Platelets. Now, platelets is the cell type, but has not been identified. So which letter represents the platelet? R would represent our platelet. And what does S represent? Very good. S is our plasma. It's pointing actually to nothing. But we know that the blood cells are held in, or they're contained in, the plasma, which is the liquid part of blood. So R would be our platelet. And another name for platelets that we learned today is, so R, our platelets, or thrombocytes, and our basic main function of our platelets is to do what? Okay? So it clots the blood. It helps to prevent blood loss by clotting. Now, it's not enough to say prevent blood loss. You have to put in by clotting, okay? So our platelets help to prevent blood loss by clotting. So it starts that chain reaction or that cascade of events that brings about forming the meshwork or the barrier that actually seals off the blood vessel to prevent blood loss. Very good. So we're now going to answer the remainder of our questions. Name the blood cell that carries out phagocytosis. So which blood cell, and now I said to name. I didn't say identify, I didn't say refer to the table or the diagram. I said to name. So which blood cell carries out phagocytosis? Very good, very good. I have, both answers are acceptable. Some people are saying white blood cells, that's acceptable. Some of you said leukocytes, that's acceptable, and phagocytes, acceptable. So very good. So we have our phagocytes, or our white blood cells that are responsible for carrying out phagocytosis. Anybody can tell me what phagocytosis is? Who can describe that process for me? So phagocytosis is when a white blood cell does what? Ingest. First, it engulfs. So when it engulfs, it actually takes it in. Then it ingests, it takes it in, and then it digests. So that means it breaks it down. So there are some enzymes that help to digest or break it down. So it engulfs or ingests, and then it digests the pathogen, destroying or killing it. Very good. Which blood cell contains hemoglobin? Which mineral makes up hemoglobin? Very good, Solomon. Very good. Iron. Very good. So iron is that mineral that makes up this hemoglobin that oxygen will eventually attach itself to. Very good. Which component makes up the greatest percentage of blood? So which component of blood makes up the greatest percentage of blood? Plasma is the liquid part of blood that makes up the greatest percentage of this fluid that we call blood. Anybody can remember about what percentage is plasma? Awesome job, 55%. Very proud of you. Great job. So 55% of our blood is plasma. And what is plasma basically? And this is a bonus question. What makes up plasma basically? Good job, Richmond. All right, water. About 90% of what we call plasma is actually water, okay? So very good, water. So the medium in which hormones are transported. So which part of blood will you find hormones being transported? The medium basically is what it's in. So where would you find hormones? Which one of the structures or components? Very good, Darnell. Plasma. Plasma is the medium that you will find the hormones are in. So the liquid part of blood is actually the part of blood that's transporting the hormones around the body. And finally, and I asked this a little bit earlier, another name for platelets. What is another name for platelets? So our thrombocytes. So I want you guys to get familiar and comfortable using all of the alternate names for those components of blood. So our red blood cells are erythrocytes, our white blood cells are leukocytes, our platelets, thrombocytes, and then of course plasma. So get comfortable using those terms or familiarizing yourself with them so you know what they are if they were to come up in a test or a quiz. Very good job. So that concludes our lesson today. Blood. We got through it all. If anybody has any questions, you can ask them now and I'll answer them for you. If not, our session will be over in a few minutes. Any questions? Okay, Camellia, lymphocytes, I wouldn't say lymphocytes provide long-term protection. If you have an infection or a disease or a viral infection, the lymphocytes are responsible for providing what I would say long-term immunity, whereas the phagocytes attack and kill on the spot, but the lymphocytes basically allows the body to build up an immunity against reinfection or new infection of the same disease. That is why, in most cases, people, if you got chickenpox once, you don't get it a second time because you've built up that immunity because of these lymphocytes. Blood clotting will work on, it all depends on the damage to the blood vessel as well. If the wound is actually very big where it's difficult for this meshwork to form very quickly, because this reaction happens very quickly. Nobody bleeds. If you were to get a cut, it happens very quickly. If you apply pressure to stop excess blood loss. But if you were to get a cut or a wound, the blood clotting process actually happens or should happen very quickly. Now, if you have a diet that is deficient in vitamin K and calcium, like we talked about earlier, this process may be slowed down a bit for you. Now, if you have a very large wound where it's difficult for this meshwork to form and actually successfully block off the blood vessel, that is why we have interventions like getting stitches to help to prevent the blood loss, because the wound may heal, but it may take a longer time to heal, and thereby resulting in a larger volume of blood loss, which can be very, very not good for you, can actually lead to you going into shock or losing too much blood. So it does not happen fast enough. So that's why you need intervention if you do have a large wound and excessive blood loss. Okay, guys. It was nice to see you today and hear from you today. We'll be meeting back again on Wednesday, where we'll continue with our discussion of the circulatory system. So hope to see you all on Wednesday. Have a great day, and don't forget to download a copy of your notes.